We all like to think of childhood as this time of joy and innocence. But, I mean, for many of us, it's just not true.
When you grow up in these type of situations, it's not something you talk about. I know I didn't.
The first thing that we found is that adverse childhood experiences are common.
Kids are young, they don't know what's going on, they won't remember anyway. Well, the child may not remember, but the body remembers.
There was this incredible gee whiz effect. You mean adverse childhood experiences cause heart disease and lung disease and liver and cancer?
Exposure to trauma affects children's developing brains. The impact is on your behavior, it's on your heart, it's on your DNA. Like, how do you deal with all that?
I don't reach out because I'm not used to that.
We have a whole new body of knowledge now that could open up what we have up till now been seen as intractable, unsolvable problems.
No child should be punched or kicked. No child should be punched or kicked.
If you can get the science into the hands of the general population, they will invent very wise actions.
Do you feel like any of the interventions have been making a difference?
They made all the difference in the world.
It's there, it's possible, and a defeatist attitude is completely disconnected from what 21st century science is telling us. And we should be going after that like a bear.
So good morning, everyone. My name's Mary Pickner, and I work for the Vermont Department of Health, Office of Local Health, Alcohol and Drug Abuse Programs, and I am the Substance Abuse Prevention Consultant for Grand Isle County. Now, it's your turn.
Right. So I'm Sam Thomas. I told you what I do here. One of the other things that I've done for a while is how to focus on trauma-informed care and talking about how adverse childhood experiences, how traumatic experiences in early childhood and through the lifespan impact individuals, and trying to share that information with the community.
So we're here today to give you a little teaser about some work that you and I have been doing for a while, but we have got it organized in a way that we are ready to bring it out to the larger community. And it really is about understanding adverse childhood experiences and a whole lot of other underlying, I say, sciencey things. I'm beginning to discover that I really am one of those people who love science, but never quite was able to say anything about that. So we're going to spend a little time just talking generally about what we've learned, particularly in the last month, about how to bring this out to the broader community, which is really everyone.
Can you just say how you got to this training and that it's a statewide thing?
Yes.
At least at some point, because it's really important that we're doing this everywhere. The Agency
Right.
of Human Services is really focused on this, as well as many community partners across the state.
Right.
So,
do you want to go?
I'll start. Well, I'll start. What, 5 years ago?
Yeah. 2013.
2013. There was a training that was done around adverse childhood experiences and just basically introduced that to many people across the state. And we were tasked in our communities to come up with a group that was going to think about how we were going to use this information in our community to make change. And our community was one of 2.5 that actually brought that forward, and we have had and still have a group that meets monthly talking about that. But one of the things that came up was it's really hard to explain this. So to go from a lot of studies to how it becomes practical and useful and affects all of us, whether it's our system or us as people or what we can do individually or as a group. And so that was sort of the conversation that was happening at the state level as well as in our group. And so one of the things that happened with a gracious grant from the Promise community is that we had the opportunity to go to a training that was offered to bring all of this together and to then be able to be tasked and go out into the community and do what we're doing, which this is the very start. So I know you want to add a couple of things.
Yeah, so building flourishing communities is what we're calling it in Vermont. Back in December, we had a 2-day opportunity to bring one of the women that you heard in that little clip, and if you watch the Resilience movie, you'll hear more about her and more from her, Laura Porter. Mary and I had an incredible opportunity just recently to be able to spend 2 days with her and Dr. Anda, which was just really excited, and our little nerdy juices were flying everywhere. Right. But back in December, we had Laura Porter come, and she came and talked to us, and there were folks from across the state, from private folks, from folks from the Agency of Human Services, from folks in our community. And what we wanted was to not have the same folks that are always at the table. We all still want to be there. But there are folks in our community that have a lot of power, and not in a traditional way. And so it's really important for us to connect with those folks that are in our communities, and that's what this is all about. So building flourishing communities is based on a model out of Washington that Laura Porter worked on called the self-healing communities, and it's based on these near sciences, neuroscience, epigenetics, ACEs, and resilience. And so it provides a really nice scientific, sciencey basis to talk about how important these early adverse experiences are and the information that we can share with our community so that our community has the power to make changes and make a difference. And so what Mary and I have done today is we've taken this talk that we were trained on a week or two ago. It feels pretty fresh. And that's typically maybe 2 to 4 hours. So this is, Joe and I were joking, it's kind of like a little infomercial. This is something that we are tasked with and excited about coming back to our communities and sharing this information. So what you're going to hear from us today is just a snippet, just a little teaser of the information that if you want us to come and talk to your groups, please let us know. We're working with Promise Communities because this was a huge partnership. We couldn't have done or gotten Building Flourishing Communities off of the ground without Promise Communities committing their time, their money, their collaboration and connection. So we're working with them. Particularly, we're starting out with our regions that we have Promise Communities up here in Franklin and Grand Isle counties. But this is something that is like Kristen said, across the state, and it's information that is really consistent. So Vermonters all over will have the opportunity to hear this really vital and important information.
All right. So, you have your notes too, right?
Yeah.
Oh, good. So,
right, because you guys are kind of our guinea pigs, right? So it's an infomercial, but you're also our guinea pigs.
Yeah. So our final project for this training was setting up a training, which we did for this, because what did we find out like the day before that our spot got moved up? So we're talking about understanding adverse childhood experiences, and so when we look at that, there's a whole series that many know because it's sort of been put out there as important and we have to understand it. But the idea around building self-healing communities and adverse childhood experiences and how we use that information is really important and helps make more effective. All right. So am I doing something?
It's okay. It might not be on.
Wait.
Now it's on.
Oh, look.
Well, it says it's on. You might just need to do that. We can go low tech.
I can do that. Okay.
Flexible. There we go.
Keep talking.
Okay. So when we think about adverse childhood experiences, those are things that, certain categories. But when we look at memory and what we learn and what we experience, those things happen from literally not only in our childhood and our interactions with a parent or a guardian or in school, it also happens right from the very beginning. And also those memories are all stored in your cells. So when we're learning, not only learning like our brain, that's also a cell, but we're not learning about math and reading and all those things. We're also learning how we are coping and living in our environment. And those things we learn through repetitive action, but they are stored in our cells in a way that you don't necessarily describe. I have a history, my work world has been working with adolescents. And I went to school and everyone says, oh, we have to experience and talk about your past. Well, I've always looked at adolescents are busy making the wreckage on a daily basis. So talking about a past might be helpful, but also stopping from moving forward is important. But when we think about these things on a cellular level, whether we are the arbiter of our past, or that has been the environment that has put that pressure on us. Those are the things that are stored on our cellular level. Okay. So when we look at this is for me. This is the part where it's the challenge. It's a challenge for you and me. It's a challenge for our systems. It's a challenge for science. It's a challenge for everybody to kind of figure out how we discover not only what was going on, which is the neuroscience piece that I found it was interesting, but it made a lot of sense of things that I had pockets of. So when we look at that and we look about how we're going to do it, the discoveries that were made and the changes, and changing the future of public health. Now, I can say that we are really lucky, and I can speak for that from my own experience, that this Office of Local Health and our health department does public health really well in a way that makes change happen, and you can see it demonstrated every day. But more importantly, when we look at having to incorporate adverse childhood experiences in neuroscience, I know that our office has a really good understanding of it and is already starting to put into practice. I always say walk the walk and talk the talk. So for me, as a person who's working up here, I feel not only is my own office, a public health office, invested in it, but our community already gets it, and maybe not be able to describe it and share it with somebody else, but we all get it on a level that we need to do something. It makes my work easier, and I'm sure it does yours too. So.
Right. So that on the left is Dr. Anda, the gentleman that we had the supreme privilege of being able to spend 2 days with just recently. And then Dr. Felitti is on the right. And it was actually really cool because we got to listen to Dr. Anda talk about how he and Dr. Felitti sat at a McDonald's and came up with the term adverse childhood experiences. And so I thought that was just really cool. We got this neat opportunity to really hear it from the horse's mouth. And what's most important for me, I think, about this is that it's a significant study, the largest of its kind, 17,000 study participants out in California. It was a partnership with CDC and the Kaiser Permanente Insurance, I'm not going to get all that right, group. They really did some incredible work to help us to understand how these early adverse experiences impact adults over the life course. We're not going to get into the details of that yet. Mary's going to talk about that as we go forward. But it's really incredible, and the research is astounding. And the neurosciences, so the neuroscience and the epigenetics, help to kind of give us a case for saying that what they found is real, and that how kids and adults experience adverse experiences, that there's a biology to it. And I think that sometimes that sciencey stuff that Mary was saying, that's what can get our buy-in with folks, because sometimes in the mental health field, sometimes people can be like, oh, that's mental health, that's a little mushy-gushy, that doesn't really have an impact, doesn't really cause anybody to have any significant health conditions. But what Mary's going to talk about is that it in fact really can. And so this is a really great opportunity these two gentlemen gave us to say, this is important and this is why. So like I said, it will be just a taste of the information. There's so much more. Mary and I both really get excited in talking about this. So we're going to do our best to keep it really short so that you can get to the rest of your agenda. So really briefly, really important to talk about the brain and the nervous system. So our human nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord, and it has this really stunningly effective way to orchestrate our functioning. It takes in sensations and input from the world. We perceive it all over our body. There are these receptors and things, and I'm going to totally show my card as not a super sciencey person with my language. But the importance is that all of the information that's coming in from our environment is experienced, read, coded through our nervous system. And what's really important is that we've got these little neurons, and the neurons are really, really important. And if you have us come out, we'll talk more specifically about some fancy words called arborization. I know that got you really excited. Gets me really excited. Yeah. But we can talk to you a little bit more about how our neurons are talking to each other. So it's really important. And those neurons are really important because they take in information, and what they do is they allow us to adapt to our environment. And that piece is really key, and as we keep talking, you'll understand why.
So one of the things we talk about, I know that in my world, two things happen. One, we say the brain is fully developed by age 3. And then there's a group of us who say the brain is fully developed between the ages of 25 and 30. And both are true, right? So our brain physically is as big as it's going to get by about age 3, right? After that, we start trimming, right? And developmentally, our brain is fully developed about age 25. That's that part where everything starts to work as it's supposed to, and we start in the back and work to the front. So when we think about those kinds of things, from essentially conception forward, there is a lot of room for things to happen. So everybody's life is unique, essentially, because how often would we have exactly the same identical experiences and have exactly the same reactions? So we can talk about this, and we'll talk about it in more detail in the larger sense. What we look at, really, when we think about neuroscience is essentially kind of two paths, right? So our bodies are designed to intake stress. We can tolerate it about 20 minutes, right? And after 20 minutes, what happens is that our body is not designed to take care of that, so it starts essentially, very simplistically, to break down. So if we are living in a world where we are having to deal with our stress chemicals are always on because we're dealing with abuse, neglect, living in a war zone, things like that, where you are on high alert at all times, that's way beyond your 20-minute max. And that's the physiology of how our bodies work, and everybody's bodies work with that. You can't just build up your tolerance, so over time you might have 45 minutes of stress and still be going. That is exactly the physiology, and 20 minutes is essentially the max. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way is to have that a nurturing and kind and supportive environment where those kinds of things aren't there, right? And so what we know is that when we have stress chemicals constantly going through our bodies, because we're always on alert, the outcomes of the way that our brain developed is much different than the way as if you were in an environment there was a lot more nurturing and support. Across the board, that has nothing to do with where you live or who you are. There are outside environmental factors that do make a difference, but if you're looking at the individual, the anatomy and the physiology of that is virtually the same. So the outcomes for living with lots of stress are very different than those that are living with different, lower stress. And I'm not talking about the kind of stress that you get like the half hour before having to come up here. I'm feeling a little stressed. I'm going to have to read from papers. I don't do that. Judy will be proud. I read and I organized, right? But all of those things go through, and that's normal stress, right? I might be feeling stressed, but I'm going to get through it, and I'm going to feel like I've accomplished something, ideally. Or if I didn't, then I'm going to go, okay, I got to go back to the drawing board. Normal stress. But the kind of stress that I'm talking about is where people have to live never knowing what's going to happen next. Or am I going to be able to cross the street safely? Am I going to get home safely? What is going to happen when I walk in the door? Who knows? As opposed to, I was just going to say things like, come home, you know that the house that you're coming to is the same house, you're not homeless all of a sudden. There are people in your life that are going to be there to help support you, whether it's getting to soccer practice or having a meal on the table, and helping you to survive with the best environment possible. Right? Outcomes for that: folks who live in stress tend to be always on alert for the next thing. They're not interested in focusing and engaging with you in a meaningful way. They might be listening to you, but they are really thinking about their environment. What do I have to watch out for? Where's the danger? Whereas folks that are brought up in much more positive, what we say, benevolent environment, don't necessarily have that. They have a different set of skills because their environment has been different. All right, so here's my one little piece. This is the middle slide of many. So just looking at this quickly, we spend a little time talking about the brain and how it functions and how it affects adverse childhood experience affects it, and the epigenetics with all of that. So the cerebellum vermis is this little part of your brain back here that basically provides all the stuff that all the connections from left brain to right brain, right? So you're going to need some your brain has all these different sections and they all need to go together, and that's what this area does, right? If you're struggling and there's a lot of stress and you're in that environment where your brain is not functioning because you have all these high rates of things like cortisol, they're not functioning as well as they can. So when we talk about our brain is fully developed at 3, if from 0 to 3 you're struggling in an environment where you have a lot of stress, we're not getting the full boat of neural opportunities, so to speak. So we will spend a lot of time talking about that. I will tell you, I haven't had to look up stuff in the dictionary for a long time, so I know things like allostatic. So that is the lower level. Normal wear and tear is what allostatic means. I was like, that is a cool word. So what we do is we have a choice. Collectively, we have a choice. Individually, we have a choice. What do we do with the information that we have? I mean, the option to do nothing is always there, but why? You know, if we already know what the outcome is if we do nothing. And so when we're looking at sensitive developmental periods, it's important to recognize that the environment, as on every level, not only the physical environment, the emotional environment, but even the chemicals that we have in our world, all affect that in our future. And we can choose to actively develop opportunities to change that. And that, when we look at this training in the broader sense, that's really what this is going forward, is that we've collectively decided that we do have a choice and we are going to take action. We are going to make changes.
I think for me, when I think about this slide, I think about when we were having this training this past couple of days, we were also talking about outcomes, right? We have to prove that we've done something good and that we've had a positive impact on our community. And I kept getting stuck in this place of what I see as the outcome for this is not super measurable. But I see as the outcome that we've changed the way that people are thinking, and that when people are walking around our streets and interacting with one another, we're making eye contact with one another. We're friendly, we're saying hello, we're not averting our eyes when we see folks who are different than us or who are engaging in a way that is adaptive, because that's what Mary's been talking about, right? There are folks that are in our community that have developed ways to engage in the world that have helped them to survive their experiences. When they come out into the world, if you've got a little one who's learned all of these skills, and they are skills, to navigate their home environment, we put them in a school. Those aren't the skills that they need in a school. They don't work. And so it's really important for us, and that for me is one of the key pieces of all of this information, is to understand that when we see something that makes us uncomfortable, makes us nervous, makes us scared, because that's natural, it's who we are, it's our natural response, is that instead of looking at that person and going, or not looking at that person, sometimes we don't, we avert our eyes, right? Looking at that person, and instead of thinking, ooh, what's wrong with them? I don't know. It's really about, boy, what might have happened to them in their life that has brought them here, that's bringing them to this place where they're interacting with the world in that way. For me, that's really the most important piece. But we'll keep going. Another 5 minutes, okay, Joe? I don't want to, is that okay? Okay. This stuff is like super cool. It's really new to me, and I am really not a scientist, but this concept of epigenetics, it's this new scientific world that talks about how experience gets under our skin. So over on the, I'm spatially unaware, over on that side, you can see our DNA and our genes. So our genes are in our DNA. Everybody know what DNA is? You can picture the double helix that you learned about and maybe made out of Twizzlers and gumdrops when you were in 4th grade. That's what we're talking about here. And we have just lengthy strands of DNA. And so kind of like a fishing pole where the fishing line is really long, you put it around a reel so that when the fisherman throws out the line, it goes out smoothly and then comes back in smoothly. You can kind of use that to picture our DNA wrapping around these protein balls in the middle, these little blue balls called histones. I know, I can't even believe I'm talking about this stuff like I know it, right? So these histones are really important, and it all travels back to these chromosomes. So the chromosome is the big picture, and as you move forward, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. The thing about epigenetics is that it's about these little orange cones. These are these little chemicals that attach to our DNA, to our genes in a specific spot. And what epigenetics tells us is that those chemicals either turn on, basically, our genes or kind of turn them off. Those chemicals allow the information on those genes to be read or to not be read. So what does that mean for ACEs, right? So they did some research. I forget who, but they did this really cool research, with rats. And they had rats that they conditioned to be fearful of the smell of a cherry blossom, right? So I don't know how they did it. I don't want to know because that kind of makes me sad. But they conditioned this fear in these rats. And then they had those rats procreate and have rat pups. They separated those rat pups, still don't like that either, and put them in another environment. They didn't have exposure to their rat mamas and daddies. And so they were in a different environment. They didn't have any exposure to the scent of cherry blossom, to the sight of a cherry blossom, nothing for their whole lives. And then the researchers introduced the smell of a cherry blossom. And those rat pups were jumpy, they were skittish, they were, you could say, the researchers are suggesting that they were fearful. They had no experience of a cherry blossom, but their parents did. And so the connection to this is that historical experiences are heritable, that they can be passed on to other generations. So there's two sides of that coin, right? There's the, ooh, yikes, that could not be great. What am I passing on to my kids? And there's the, wow, what are these amazing things that I could be passing on to my kids? And there's a lot of new research that's going on right now to talk about, are there things like nurturing, really positive human interaction and skills that can be passed on to different generations? And so we'll talk more about this in our lengthier presentation, but this is some really exciting stuff.
So, I don't know how many have seen this. This is sort of like the picture that everyone talks about when we look at adverse childhood experiences. But what all of this study between epigenetics and the adverse childhood experiences is that what they figured out was that all of this stuff isn't random. There's actually reasoning behind that, and they've had enough studies to figure out this is a part of the brain, this is the gene and the histone that was on or off. And we had this great study where they studied all these people who were not from all different walks of life. They tend to be educated, middle class, white folks in San Diego. Mm-hmm. And so that we were talking about a specific group of people. But what they got out of that was that it wasn't, they looked at all the different health issues and realized it had to do with adverse experiences. So when we look at that, and the way we look at we've sort of looked at public health in I don't know, probably forever, but since I've been in public health, is that we look at health risk and behaviors, we look at disease, disability, and social problems, and then we look essentially at early death. So those are the top three. And what do we do with those? We look at, changing, whether it's poor diet, having exercise, looking to reduce your blood pressure through whatever means that we're using it, but we're taking it from a public health model, which means that everybody gets affected. We aren't just looking at one particular person at a time, right? So the idea around looking at this and this information that neuroscience has come up with and we're working on now is really the bottom three, that we can look at historical trauma and things that happen intergenerationally, whether you smell cherry blossoms or not, right? Your adverse childhood experiences, of which there were 10 that they studied, I think 9 that they studied, but they broke one apart, so there's 10. And then the social, emotional, and cognitive functioning. Because what we know that if children are not emotionally available to learn, it is really hard to teach. And if people, as adults, are not available to take in the information that you're offering, it's really hard to make change. So these are some of, when we look at adverse childhood experiences, household dysfunction, neglect, and abuse are the things that they studied. And these are some of the things that have come up. 27% of the folks in that study had substance abuse disorders. 15% of those who said yes to the neglects had emotional disorders. And same, 11% with abuse. So those are the things, right? 5, 2, and 3. So those are the things that came up with the 10 total ACEs. So it does play out in our lives. And this is 17,000 people. So we're talking essentially population level, right? We don't focus on the fact that each individual person took this survey. We focus on all the information together. And these are some of those results. So what we know is the more, when you do this survey, the more adverse childhood experiences you have that are in household dysfunction, neglect, or abuse, the higher the percentages of health problems across the board. 17,000 people, population data. That's like our whole world. So we can take that, or we did take that information and take a much closer look at it. So when we look at that, and nationally we say, oh, we have to do something different because now we have information, so we're aware of it, right? We've gotten to the point where we can accept it because we have other fields of study such as epigenetics and neuroscience that help support that. So now it's time for us to take action. And so when we look at that and we come back to our community, what we ask them is, let's just look at some of these adverse childhood experiences attributed problems. I mean, are there any that we can see here that are in our community, in our families, in our own lives, without having to count the number of adverse childhood experiences, just that information? And for me, and I know for you, the answer is yes. So we have work to do.
I think the other thing that's really important for me when we're talking about ACEs is, you can leave it there.
Okay.
That's fine, thank you. Is that when we're looking at this research and this data, that it's really important that folks don't feel like this is doom and gloom and doomsday. Mm-hmm. Mary mentioned that this is about population health. These numbers, these risks, these percentages are about folks on a population level. There's a website. You can go and get your ACE score. Those 10 questions are there. But I don't want somebody to go online and get their ACE score of an 8 and say, whew, well, I'm really in for it. That's really not what it's about. We don't want folks to be feeling like there's this doom and gloom. There's a lot of folks out there that are looking at, okay, who are those folks that have really high ACE scores and are doing a really nice job? Dr. Anda not always, but a lot of the times he'll have in his audience, he'll have them all take the ACE test. I shouldn't say that, that's not the right language. Get their ACE score. And what he finds is that even in a room of folks that you might think, because everyone's doing so successfully well, that maybe the ACE scores would be low. That ACE scores tend to be higher. He even says in the resilience film that the highest ACE scores that he found in a group of conference attendees were folks from I think the APA, from the American Psychological Association, or it was psychiatrists or something like that. You'll have to watch the movie to fact check me. But ACEs are in our lives. They're in this room. And it's important to recognize that these adverse experiences can impact us over the course of our lives. They can impact kids' behavior, which you've got kids that are blowing up at school. Maybe they're getting kicked out. Maybe they're not getting the education that they need. You can see that path, right? We work with folks all the time. And so it's important for us to know that, I think you can go to the next one, that even though ACEs are common, that they're interrelated, and that they're powerful, that we can do a lot to prevent them. And that's really the message. That's when we get in that near science to resilience, and really talking about how do we mitigate these effects? How do we get to a place where we have a culture where we don't have any ACEs, or we have very few ACEs? That's really what we're talking about. That's the culture shift that we are talking about.
Okay.
Yep. This is just one slide that I really like that we won't spend much time on here because we've gone way over our time. But these epidemiologists who are really smart math and science people have used this thing called population attributable risk. And so there's a lot of math that goes into this that I couldn't give you the details on, but I can get you the information if you're interested. This is kind of an oil slick. And so you can see around the outside marijuana use, anxiety, life dissatisfaction, recent depression, things that are troublesome for folks, right? And that oil slick in the middle with those percentages is the percentage attributable risk that the science that we've learned about, the science of ACEs, neuroscience, and epigenetics, suggests that there is a cause and effect relationship here. That early childhood adverse experiences, say for life dissatisfaction down here, count for 67.2% of folks that are impacted by life dissatisfaction. So this is a really incredible and astounding kind of picture to say, if we can get in there and we can prevent these ACEs, if we can make this cultural shift, look at the reduction we could make in all of these impacts. And we have some other they're called our oil slicks slides that show a number of different impacts. Days missed of work, other things that hopefully as we get out into our community, we can find some of those things that are really most important for folks to get hooked in. So maybe we'll just do a quick fly through of the resilience so that you guys can get onto here.
Okay. So protective systems basically provide an inoculation, and when we're looking at damage or disruption of these systems, the consequences for positive adaptive capacity of individuals goes down. And there are three sort of spheres of influence that we work with. One of them's individual capabilities, and so we're looking at basically talking a positive view, whether it's your own personal positive view or people are supporting you in a positive way so that you're going to go on and do better at something. And I think of things like when we learn math, right? You know, as I can say, in my school, women were not going to be science and math people, so it was like, oh, you'll just get it, right? Well, today we encourage our young women to be interested in maths and sciences, which is a big shift, and that's possible. That's positive in a way that I'm feeling confident about the way that I learn about math. Like, people do math with letters at a much earlier age. So also we look at attachment and belonging, right? And that we have vital relationships. And we're not just talking with parents and guardians, we're talking with people that we come in contact with. And that's that eye contact, that genuine interest in caring. And the idea that we're going to have resilience, we can bounce back, and that we can recover from what the history is, and not just the history in our own personal lives, but also the history historically. And this is really the last one, is that we're going to foster thriving communities. You know, as a society, and I think as our community, is we come to the point where we recognize if we don't foster a healthy community, we will not survive. We're a small state, and if we don't have the kind of success and the thriving that we need to invest in order to succeed, even in this community, it has dire consequences. So from that standpoint, absolutely. But I don't know about anybody else, but for me, I really like to feel good about things, and I don't like going out into the world and seeing things that make me unhappy. So to be able to eliminate those essentially will then help me and everyone else just have a better attitude and a better focus, and reduce the adverse childhood experiences, and over time, generationally, have less of those little orange things not turning on. So.
Right. I think the other thing that makes me feel really, really positive about our community is that I know that this is an initiative that started many years ago that had some funding attached to it, and lots of different areas around the states were doing it when there was funding attached to it, and then funding went away, and our community kept meeting. And this room, I was looking at that list of folks who come sometimes or every time, and there's almost 200 people that are interested and want to be participating in this. And this room is huge. So I know that our communities have a lot of strength that we can build on. And our intention, Mary and my intention, is to get this information to everyone, really. So please let other folks know that we're happy to come out and share this information. We can be flexible with the amount of time that we take, even though clearly we took up your whole time. We can edit better. But it's just really important. And just a couple of things to talk about what we're already doing in our community. I mentioned some of the work that I'm doing with schools. We have another person that's on our ACES committee that's also doing work with schools. And our ACES meeting is the first Friday?
Nope.
Second. Thank you.
It's
this Friday. Second Friday of every month at the State Building on Federal Street. And it's really exciting. It's an opportunity for folks to come together across all of our different disciplines to talk about how do we continue to use this language? How do we continue to share this language? How do we get to people that we don't usually get to? And support them and motivate them to take this powerful information and make a significant change. We've done some great work here at NCSS the last couple years working with the National Council on Behavioral Health to change our culture, to make sure that when people walk through our doors, whether they're clients of ours or employees of ours, that they feel safe and that they feel respected. And we want everyone to be doing that. We want our community to be trauma informed. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll leave that slide up until they take it down.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you very much, Sam and Mary. Anyone have
Welcome.
any questions? Or I know. Yes, Mark.
I was just wondering, Sam, if you could
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the kind of work that you're doing with schools and how you think schools. I'm always concerned that schools are not only getting this information, but then how do they use this to help the students, which I think they're kind of struggling with.
So I think so Joelle Van Lent is she's a private clinician in our community and area, and we've been kind of tag teaming trying to get to all of our schools, and I think that at least on some level we've gotten to most of our schools, certainly in Franklin County, and working our way into Grand Isle. There's different levels where schools are able to access that support based on all of the different demands that they have placed on them. And so I've been able to provide, 1 or 2 time trainings where I'm sharing the information and encouraging them to continue to think about this information, to look at their practices and say, okay, are we doing this because this is how we've always done it, or are we doing this because this is really what's right for kids? But in other situations, we've had schools that have said, we want that training, and then we want you to come back and talk about it. We want you to problem solve around specific kids. It's always de-identified because I'm not a member of the school district, but just, problem solving around that, but also talking about their broader culture and talking about how do teachers and support staff, paraprofessionals, how do the custodial staff get this information so that they're a part of that culture and that everything that they're doing is impacting and creating a safe space for students. So I think there's lots of schools kind of on the continuum at different places, but it's been really exciting for me to go out and work with them and kind of feel a part of their community and help them to better understand how all of this information can make their students' experience better, can increase their test scores, which I know is a big thing for schools. They've got to have those high test scores. But also I think for me, when I learned this information, it just made me feel lighter in the work that I do. I used to carry so much that was frustration and I didn't understand, and I would get frustrated with kids for behaving the way that they did. And then when I learned this, I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. Is it hard sometimes? Absolutely. But that different understanding and that lens just allowed me to do better work and feel better about it. And I think we all are, the work that we do is really tough. And so anything that can help us to feel a little bit lighter is huge.
I mean, information is power. When you have the information, the opportunity to change. And, I know working with some teachers where it was like, once I figured this out, I understood it, I can now approach not so much the content of what I teach, but I can deliver it in a way where the children that I work with are gaining. And what I do know from working with teachers and working with both you and Joelle is it benefits everybody. So if you can find something, that information that you can put into action and make your job easier, I'm all in. And so that is incredibly helpful.
I just want to thank you both, because taking this training was a big obligation, and it wasn't part of either one of your jobs, really. You chose to do it. And I would say from the state's perspective, we've known about ACEs for quite a while. Folletti came 4 years ago here, and we're back on track to supporting this work and hopefully getting a trauma coordinator for the state and the agency. And the science is real. It's not going away. Folletti and Anda were able to prove that people died because of their adverse childhood experiences when their scores were really high. No matter how much intervention we did, some people just weren't able to get better. Most were, but some weren't. And so that was the shocking piece to me, especially around obesity, which is a big problem for me. And so I am really excited about both of you. Your training was awesome this morning, and I think you presented it in a way that was really easy to access and people can understand it. So I just want to encourage everybody to support you into getting this out there to the bigger group, because it isn't going anywhere, and we're going to learn from this, and we're going to make things better around this. And the question of what happened to you as opposed to what's wrong with you is the key. It's the starting point.
And we have an opportunity to take this information and talk to our legislators about it. You know, there is legislation right now where AHS has been developing information to share with a legislative work group. We're working on testimony to share with the legislators what we know. And so we can kind of be ahead of the game by getting this information. Totally agree.
And I also think from like a parent view, it's like I have the opportunity to fix some of the things that happen to me so they don't happen in the future, or that my children don't have to residually experience that. Which when I did this training, I became keenly aware of how that works. So,
and I think the only other thing as you're considering having us out to your communities is that it's not all about Mary and I getting up here and talking at you. We kind of had to in this infomercial, but there are activities, and we want discussion, because that's where the richness is going to come from, and that's where perspective shifting is going to take place.
And the movie is amazing.
Yeah,
I've
so
seen
good.
it 3 times.
Yeah.
And I'm going to continue to see it because every time I learn more.
Right. Yeah, it's so powerful.
Absolutely.
What does the research say about remediation? You've talked a lot of what this is about is understanding and preventing, but what happens to people, and how do you what does that show about remediation?
You can. You can retrain. It's just once it's set, it's hard to undo it, but a lot of that behavior and character and change around those things can happen. It just takes a lot longer. So if we can prevent it from happening, absolutely. And I look in my own world around substance use. You know, we think once people find recovery, oh, they're all healed. Well, it takes a long time, 5 years, 10 years. And so it has to be, when you look at making these changes for remedial purposes or improving and making life changes, it's much longer than we think. And it's not just some pill and a few sessions with the therapist. It's about learning to practice in everyday life and then getting support from other people who've either been there before or are going to help you along the way. But absolutely, even when you have youth come to school. And I always said, you know, the first day of kindergarten was like watching Spider-Man, you know, climb. You were like, oh my God. But today I look at that and go, makes total sense. And today I can look at that and make those interventions, even though that child has some history. It's, you know, it's repairable. It's changing, bending the curve, making a difference. So.
And the neuroscience tells us that we can do it, you know, because we talk a lot about the neuroscience of how our brains are developing and those connections that are made when we're young, but we can have corrective experiences where our brains are making new connections as adults as well. So as long as we're taking this information and using it, we can be helping folks to, whatever word you want to use, to heal.
Addiction is a perfect example. There are many people in long-term recovery who have worked really hard to change those addictive behaviors. It doesn't mean that some of us won't, like, you know, love to have 10 cups of Diet Coke or, you know, obsess over Caesar salad, but you know that there are things that you just can't do. But it takes a long time for those things. Yeah.
Well,
you know.
a lot of coping behaviors that don't suit us well.
Right.
I was wondering, has there been any attempt to marry the developmental assets to the ACEs? Because I feel like the developmental assets are the opposite of ACEs.
Yes, and I think more embedded in some of the work that Dr. Unger does around resiliency. And he doesn't necessarily use those, oh, these are the developmental assets, but they're there in different language. I like the developmental assets because they come on one page in a chart. I can go, here we go. If we want to pick one, let's pick one. And that's what I love about that. But the work that Dr. Under does with resiliency is very similar. A different view, but I think the outcomes or the goals are just about the same. So maybe as we work, that's a possibility. Yeah. Other questions? One last one?
Good job, ladies.
Okay, super.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.